What do you mean you turned them away, just because they looked like college kids? That sentence echoed in Wallace Price's head as he stood in line for his shift orientation, dressed in worn jeans, a company-issued polo 2 sizes too big, and a ball cap pulled low over his forehead. He had grown the beard out for this. Gray streaks helped. Glasses helped more. He looked nothing like the man who owned all 9 of these gas stations scattered across western Pennsylvania. Nobody at this location had ever met him. It was store number 6 on the edge of a college town. He'd bought the chain 6 years ago from a retiring couple who'd built it from the ground up. Back then, he'd been hands-on. He'd worked the shifts, fixed the pumps, even mopped the bathroom floors. But as the company grew, so did his distance from the day to day. He hired district managers, relied on performance reports, and trusted customer feedback surveys. But lately, things weren't adding up. Profits at Store 6 were fine. Too fine. No overtime logged, no employee turnover, no complaints. But that was the problem, nothing. Not even the usual noise that came with running a gas station. It was too clean. Then last week, a friend of Wallace's daughter told him they'd been laughed out of the store when they tried to apply for part-time work. They said we should go flip lattes or stick to TikTok, she'd said. Wallace didn't say much then, just nodded, but he knew he had to see it for himself. So here he was, under the name Greg, a new trainee starting the Monday morning shift. Just before orientation started, the manager walked in. "All right, listen up," she barked. "We don't have time for slow learners or whiners. If you can't keep up, speak now or leave." She was tall, mid-40s, with a tight ponytail and sharper eyes than most. Her name tag said Supervisor, Rhonda. Wallace had never met her. She'd been hired by his district manager a few years back after the previous supervisor left. On paper, she was solid always under budget, 0 HR flags, but also 0 employee reviews. The other trainee, a nervous kid named Brandon, raised his hand. What if we have questions?" Rhonda turned. "Then you better Google it before you waste my time." Wallace watched as the kid's face sank. He made a note. Training was mostly shadowing. Wallace followed around a part-timer named Kayla, a 21-year-old with a bubbly voice and the kind of multitasking speed that only came from someone who actually gave a damn. "I know it's a lot," she whispered at one point, "but if you just keep moving, you'll be fine. Don't take anything Rhonda says personal." Wallace nodded. She always like that. Kayla hesitated. "Let's just say she's not here to make friends." Mid-shift, around 10, 2 young guys walked in wearing hoodies and backpacks. They looked like they'd just come from class. One headed to the drink cooler, the other grabbed a protein bar. Rhonda stepped from the back office, arms crossed. "Ugh, not this again," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "You two again? What no frat house to loiter in?" The taller student looked confused. "We're just buying stuff." "No, you're browsing. Big difference. Hurry up or get out. This isn't your dorm cafeteria." The store went quiet. Kayla froze. Wallace stood behind the counter, heart pounding. The student said nothing and left. One of them tossed the protein bar back on the shelf. Rhonda turned to Kayla. "You see, that's how you keep the place clean. No time for broke students stealing Red Bulls." Kayla didn't answer. She just looked down and kept scanning in a box of gum refills. Wallace gritted his teeth. This wasn't just rude, it was targeted, and it didn't sit right. During break, Wallace sat outside on the curb next to Brandon, who was eating a bag of chips. "She always like that?" Wallace asked. Brandon shrugged. "Yeah. She told me yesterday not to bother learning the lottery system because she said I looked too slow to handle it." Wallace narrowed his eyes. "She said that?" Brandon nodded. I laughed it off, but yes." That night, Wallace couldn't sleep. He sat in his rental car outside the store, watching the night shift come in. A guy named Manuel, mid-30s, held the door for an older customer, smiled, chatted, helped her carry a box of windshield wipes. There were good people here, but they were being buried under someone who clearly didn't care. The next morning, Wallace arrived early to help with restocking. Kayla showed up with 2 coffees. "I got you one," she said, handing him the cup. "You made it through day 1. Wallace smiled. "Thanks, you didn't have to." "Well, most people don't make it past the first day. Thought you earned it." They worked together through the early rush. Rhonda showed up around 8, barking about a missing shipment and accusing Kayla of misplacing the order. "That's not possible. I checked it in myself," Kayla said. "Then you clearly can't count. Maybe next time get one of your college friends to help." Wallace stepped forward. "I checked the order too. It was short." Rhonda turned. "Who asked you?" Wallace didn't flinch, just saying what I saw. She rolled her eyes and walked off, muttering again about kids these days. Wallace's jaw tightened. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was her normal. But he needed to see more. He needed to know how deep it went and who else was dealing with it. Because when he made the reveal, and he wanted every word to count. By Thursday morning, Wallace had counted 3 separate incidents where Rhonda dismissed customers with sarcasm and 2 where she openly criticized employees in front of each other. She didn't yell she was smarter than that. Her weapon of choice was quiet condescension, delivered with just enough plausible deniability to pass under the radar of anyone not paying attention. But Wallace was paying attention. He had started keeping a log on the back of an unused receipt roll tucked into his back pocket. He didn't write everything, just patterns. Times, names, witnesses. He wasn't building a case out of spite. He needed specifics, not instincts. If he was going to make changes, they'd have to be grounded in facts. That morning, he was on register with Kayla, who looked more tired than usual. Her responses were shorter, her pace a little slower. "You doing all right?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "I'm fine," she said without looking up. "Double shift yesterday. Rhonda called out last minute, again." Wallace paused. "How often does that happen?" Kayla finally glanced at him. 3 times this month. She says she's working from the office, but she usually just clocks in and leaves. He watched her work through a line of customers without missing a scan. A man wanted lottery tickets, and she rattled off the numbers faster than Wallace could follow. By the time the morning rush was through, Kayla had already restocked the gum rack, wiped down the coffee station, and started organizing the next delivery. Wallace asked, "Who's supposed to be managing inventory on weekends?" "I am," Kayla said. "Technically, it's Rhonda's job, but if I don't do it, we run out of things by Tuesday." He leaned on the counter. "You ever bring that up to the district manager?" She laughed once through her nose. "I did. A year ago, he said I should be grateful for the leadership opportunity." Wallace said nothing. He just watched her tape a handwritten stock list to the backroom wall exactly where it should have been in the system. Near noon, Brandon came in early for his shift. His eyes were red. He moved slowly, like his limbs were dragging behind him. "Everything all right?" Wallace asked. "I got written up yesterday," Brandon said, setting his backpack down behind the counter. "For what?" "Rhonda said I was late, but I clocked in 5 minutes early. She said she didn't see me." Wallace glanced at the timestamp on the sheet. Brandon had clocked in at 10:55. His shift started at 11. "Did you show her the log?" She said the system was glitchy, and her word mattered more. Wallace clenched his jaw. That ever happened to anyone else? Brandon nodded. "Manuel last week, same thing." The boy didn't look angry, he looked resigned. Like he'd already accepted that fairness wasn't part of the job. Later that afternoon, Wallace shadowed Manuel during restock. The guy was fast, efficient, and polite. When a customer asked where the windshield washer fluid was, Manuel left the pallet mid-load to walk her to the exact shelf. Then he returned and finished the job without complaint. Wallace asked, "You've been here a while, right?" 4 years. Why not step up, take on more responsibility? Manuel gave a small shrug. Tried that, asked Rhonda if I could train for keyholder. She said I wasn't the right fit. Wallace tilted his head. What does that mean? She said I'm better in the back, less customer-facing. Wallace didn't respond. He just picked up a box of motor oil and helped shelve it. By Friday, he had watched Rhonda disappear into the back office by 9 and not reappear until 2. When he knocked on the door under the pretense of needing a password to the safe, she opened it just wide enough to hand him a sticky note, then shut it without a word. Inside, he'd caught a glimpse of her watching a true crime show on her phone, earbuds in. That evening, Wallace volunteered to help close. Kayla stayed late again, not because she had to, but because the shift was short and Brandon was struggling to keep up. The cooler was low on milk and nobody had time to check it. When Wallace offered to do it, Kayla stopped him. "You're still in training. You don't have to cover all this." He looked at her. "Who else is going to?" She hesitated. "You're not like most new hires. Most people just do the minimum." Wallace didn't answer. He just grabbed the dolly and headed for the walk-in. At closing, Brandon accidentally rang up a customer twice. The man, in his 50s, got frustrated and demanded a refund on the spot. Brandon fumbled with the register and started to panic. Kayla stepped in calmly. "Let me take over. I've got this." She issued the refund, then apologized. The man left satisfied, but Brandon looked ready to quit on the spot. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I just get nervous." Kayla didn't scold him, she just nodded. "You'll get better, but you've got to breathe, mistakes happen." After the store was locked up, Wallace stayed behind to help Kayla finish the deposit. She looked over at him once and said, "You know, for a guy who claims to be new, you're weirdly comfortable with all this." He smiled. "Maybe I just care." She smiled back, but it was tired. "I wish more people did." The next morning, Saturday, Wallace arrived before sunrise. He wanted to catch Rhonda before she could disappear again. She didn't show up until 8:30. She walked in, sunglasses on, coffee in hand, and dropped her purse behind the counter like it was a throne. "You're early," she said to Wallace. "Wanted to get a head start." She looked at him for a moment. "You know, you might actually make it past probation. Just keep your head down and don't try to impress anyone." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. She didn't stick around anyway. She was back in the office before the coffee timer finished its cycle. By mid-morning, Wallace had seen enough. The line at the register was 15 deep. The coffee station was out of stirras. A customer knocked over a display and Brandon went to pick it up, only to be told by Rhonda, who appeared just long enough to criticize, that he was causing clutter. Kayla stepped in. Again, covered Brandon's lane. Again, then restocked the stirras with one hand while bagging chips with the other. At 11:30, Wallace asked Kayla to join him in the stockroom for a minute. She looked confused but followed him back. He shut the door behind them and took off his hat. "I'm not Greg," he said quietly. "My name's Wallace Price." She blinked. "What?" "I own this store and the other 8 locations." She stared at him. You're the owner." He nodded. "I needed to see what was happening here. I've been out of touch, that's on me." She crossed her arms. "So what now?" Wallace looked her in the eye. "Now fix it." She didn't say anything at first. Then she sat down on a crate and let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it in for months. "I thought I was going crazy," she said. "Like maybe this was just how it had to be." "No," Wallace said. This is not how it has to be. He stepped out of the stockroom and walked straight to the office. Rhonda was on her phone, feet up on the desk. When she saw him, she rolled her eyes. Can you not barge in? He cut her off. Take your things, you're done here. She stared at him. Excuse me. He stepped forward. You've created a toxic environment. You've lied about hours, mismanaged staff, and driven away both customers and potential hires. I've seen it myself. You're finished. Her mouth opened, then closed. She stood slowly, as if still trying to process what was happening. You can't just fire me. I can, and I am. He turned and walked out. Behind him, the office stayed silent. The store, meanwhile, kept moving. Kayla was already helping a customer refill his gas card. Brandon was cleaning up the knocked-over display. Manuel waved as he walked in for his shift. Wallace stood by the counter for a moment, watching it all unfold. Then he picked up a broom and started sweeping the entryway. He wasn't done, not even close. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally in the right place. Wallace didn't leave the store after firing Rhonda. He stayed behind the counter that Saturday, quietly observing as the team adjusted to her absence. There was no celebration, just a cautious, drawn-out silence. Kayla avoided eye contact. Brandon kept glancing toward the back office, as if she might reappear. Even Manuel, who just clocked in 20 minutes earlier, paused before starting his usual routine. Nobody said it, but it was there, the tension of uncertainty. They didn't know what came next, and Wallace didn't blame them. He waited until the last customer left, before stepping out from behind the register. I know this is probably a shock, he said, looking from face to face. But I want to be clear about something. You didn't imagine what's been happening here. You weren't overreacting. What I saw this week confirmed every concern I came in with and more. Kayla leaned on the counter, arms crossed. So what now? Are we getting a new manager tomorrow? No, Wallace said. There's no quick fix. I'm not dropping in a new supervisor who doesn't know this store or this team. Not yet. Brandon rubbed the back of his neck. Then who's running things? Wallace looked at Kayla. You are, for now. She blinked. Me. You've already been doing it unofficially. You know the inventory, the operations, the team. I'll work with you directly until we figure out a long-term structure. She hesitated. I'm not trained. I don't know the system codes or reports or whatever corporate needs. I'll handle the back end. You focus on the floor, the schedule, and keeping the place running day to day. We'll meet every night to go over anything you need. 1-week trial. That's all I'm asking. Manuel pulled a crate closer and sat down. What about payroll issues? I've been short 10 hours this month. I talked to Rhonda twice, but she said it was a rounding error. You'll get every hour you've worked. And moving forward, I'll be reviewing all time cards until we find someone trustworthy to take over that part. They didn't thank him. They didn't nod or cheer. They just stood there processing. Kayla finally spoke. All right, I'll give it a week. Wallace nodded once. That's all I need. They opened the next morning with 2 people short. One had called out sick. The other was Rhonda's cousin, who'd quit the minute he heard she was gone. Wallace offered to cover mornings for now. He didn't need to be asked twice. He arrived early, helped open the cooler, and ran the register during the pre-work rush. Kayla handled the deposit and shift log, then coached Brandon through the lottery system while Wallace restocked the counter displays. Most customers didn't notice anything different, but a few did. An older woman in a green shawl paused at the counter and said, "You're new, you're polite. I like that." Wallace smiled. "Thank you." "No one's yelled at me for asking about receipt paper this time," she added, grabbing her bag. "That's a first." By mid-afternoon, Wallace was in the back checking the digital inventory, when Kayla walked in holding a clipboard. "We're out of windshield fluid again," she said. "Flagged it last week in the request log, but nobody submitted the order." "Show me the system," Wallace said. Kayla pulled up the order history and pointed to a blank section. "Here, no entries for the last 10 days. That's Rhonda's login." Wallace leaned closer. She wasn't submitting anything. She was checking the boxes on the clipboard, but never inputting them. Wallace exhaled through his nose. "All right, let's fix it now." They submitted the orders together, then adjusted the delivery schedule to match actual sales velocity instead of the outdated projections Rhonda had been using. Kayla moved faster than he expected, asking sharp questions about vendor lead times and flagging SKUs that needed price adjustments. By the time they finished, Wallace turned to her. "You've done this before," he said. She shrugged. "I used to help my dad run inventory for his hardware store back in high school. I guess some of it stuck." "You've got a good eye for operations." Kayla didn't respond to that. She just tapped her pen against the clipboard and said, "We should adjust the overnight restock cycle. Manuel's been doing it solo for too long. Let's talk to him tonight." That evening, Wallace waited until the store quieted down, then asked Manuel to sit with him on the curb behind the building. The sky was streaked with orange. A delivery truck rumbled across the lot next door. "You've been covering the overnight restocks for months," Wallace said. "That ends this week." Manuel looked over. "You saying I'm off night shift?" "No, I'm saying we're hiring a second person for it. And if you're willing, I'd like you to train them." Manuel took a sip from his water bottle. "You trust me with that?" "You've earned some trust, not just this week. Your whole record shows it." He nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it, but I want them to learn the right way, not just speed. Accuracy matters more." "Agreed." Wallace gave him a moment, then asked, "Why didn't you leave?" Manuel glanced at the sky. "I got a kid, 7 years old. I take her to school every morning after work. Stable hours mattered more than dealing with Rhonda." Wallace nodded once. "That's going to change." The new hire came 2 days later, a local student named Maya. She was sharp, soft-spoken, and willing to start at odd hours. Kayla handled her onboarding. Wallace watched from a distance as she walked Maya through the register system, pausing only to jot down questions for later. That night, Wallace caught Kayla at the back counter, reading through Rhonda's old shift schedules. "She had people working 7 days straight," Kayla said, pointing at the chart. "No rotations, no breaks longer than 10 hours. "Redo the whole thing," Wallace said. "Build it from scratch." Kayla looked up. "What if we don't have enough people?" "Then we stagger hours, get creative. But nobody works 7 days again. That's not negotiable." She didn't argue. She just nodded and pulled out a blank sheet. By Friday, things started to settle. Brandon was quicker on the register. Maya had memorized half the cooler layout. Manuel's new trainee, a quiet guy named Darius, was learning the restock system one shelf at a time. Wallace stayed until after close, helping Darius finish the backroom logs. As they walked out together, Wallace asked, "How's the training going?" "He's strict," Darius said, "but fair. I don't mind that." The next morning, Wallace arrived to find a note taped to the office door. It was from Kayla. "Inventory prepped, schedules posted, deposit secured. Took initiative on the price updates for aisle 3. Let me know if anything looks off." He smiled to himself and walked to the front. The store was clean. The team was focused. Customers came and went without confrontation. For the first time since he'd gone undercover, Wallace felt like the place was breathing again. But he wasn't finished. Not yet. There were still long-term changes to make, training to build, a leadership gap to fill. Still, for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was standing in someone else's company. He felt like he was home. Wallace arrived at store 6 just before sunrise the following Monday, a full week since he'd revealed himself. The air was still cool, the asphalt damp from an early drizzle. He unlocked the front himself, flicked on the lights, and did a slow walk through the aisles. Product levels were tighter, but nothing was empty. The floor shone faintly, mopped just before close. The register drawers were balanced. None of it was perfect, but it was honest. The store didn't feel like a performance anymore. Kayla came in just after 6 with a bag of receipts and a binder under her arm. She walked straight to the back office, set everything down, and pulled up the sales dashboard on the computer without needing to be asked. Wallace leaned against the doorway. "Print out the numbers for the week," he said. "Bring them with you to the meeting." She turned her head. "Meeting? You're leading it." They gathered in the break area just before the morning shift. Manuel sat at the edge, arms crossed but eyes attentive. Darius leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. Brandon fidgeted with a pen. Maya stood near the corner, listening more than watching. Kayla arrived last, papers in hand. Wallace stayed standing. "I wanted today to be different," he began. "I've been here long enough now to see what this team actually does. It's not invisible anymore. So moving forward, here's what's changing." He nodded at Kayla. She stepped up awkwardly, then cleared her throat. "First, the schedule is going to rotate every 2 weeks. Everyone will have at least 1 full day off during each rotation, and overnight shifts will be split between 2 people whenever possible." She looked down at her notes, then continued. "We're also setting up a feedback box. Anonymous. You can use it to flag anything that's not working, from equipment problems to shift conflicts, and I'll review it every Saturday." Brandon raised a hand. "What about when the cooler breaks again? Last time it took 3 days to get fixed." Kayla glanced at Wallace, then answered. "From now on, equipment issues go straight to Wallace. He's putting together a service list with vendors we can call ourselves, instead of waiting for corporate approvals." Manuel leaned back slightly. "That'll help." Wallace stepped forward. "I'm also appointing Kayla as interim assistant manager. That's official. Pay bump included. She's earned it. She'll run day to day, and I'll stay involved until the right manager is in place. No outside hires until this team agrees it's the right fit." Nobody clapped. That wasn't the kind of team this was. But Kayla's shoulders straightened slightly, and Darius gave her a quiet nod. Wallace continued. "There's one more thing. Starting next week, I'm launching a rotation where I spend a shift each month working at one of the 9 stores. Not watching, working. Stocking, register, whatever's needed. I'm not letting myself drift again." Manuel raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" "I am." Brandon looked over at Kayla. "We gonna get training for the stuff Rhonda used to handle, like the vendor calls?" Kayla already had an answer ready. "Yes, I'm breaking it into pieces and we'll pair off. I'll go over the ordering system with you first. Darius gets the deposit process next. Manuel's helping me with the overnight inventory walkthroughs." Wallace watched their eyes shift, not with doubt anymore, but with focus. They weren't waiting for someone to fix it for them. They were stepping into it. After the meeting, Wallace pulled Kayla aside. "You handled that better than most district managers I've met." She shook her head, still figuring it out. "You're allowed to, but you've got instincts. Use them." She looked at him for a moment, then asked something quietly. "Why didn't you do this sooner?" He didn't have a clean answer. He didn't try to make one up. "I stopped looking," he said. "Assumed things were fine because the numbers were good. That was a mistake." She nodded once. "You're fixing it now," she said. Wallace stayed through the lunch rush, jumping in where needed. He changed out the receipt paper, walked a new customer through the loyalty app, and restocked motor oil when the shelf hit single digits. Maya handled a tough customer who insisted he'd paid with cash when the register showed card. She stayed calm, checked the transaction log, and resolved it without escalation. By the end of the shift, Wallace called her over. "You handled that well. You want to train for shift lead?" Maya hesitated. "I've only been here a week." "You've got the right temperament. Think about it." She nodded, not committing, but not walking away either. That evening, Wallace stepped outside for a breather. Rain had started again, light and steady. He stood beneath the metal awning and watched traffic pass along the highway. Kayla joined him a minute later, folding her arms to keep warm. "Store feels different," she said. "It should." She glanced toward the lot. A group of college students were filling up at Pump 6, laughing about something on someone's phone. One of them walked in for snacks, hoodie soaked through. Kayla didn't move to stop him, she just watched. Wallace followed her gaze. "Think they'll come back?" he asked. "If we treat them right," she said, "they will." He let the silence sit for a moment. Then he asked, "You ever think about managing full-time, long-term?" She exhaled through her nose. "I never did, but now, maybe, if it's real, if it stays like this." "It will, if we keep showing up." She nodded, then "Yeah, I'll think about it." They stood there a bit longer, listening to the rain drum against the metal roof. No speeches, no final declarations, just steady, grounded quiet, the kind that came after the hardest part was over and the work of rebuilding had begun. Inside, Brandon was wiping down the counters without being told. Manuel was explaining the restock labels to Darius. Maya was behind the register, her posture more relaxed than it had been all week. It wasn't a perfect store, but it was theirs again.